so much in what relationships, the value of relationships in the classroom, in schools, and even, specifically in this day and age today. So it is so great, just so great to be here today. And this area, this region reminds me a lot of where I grew up and actually where I ended up teaching my first 10 years in a town called Hingham, Massachusetts, south shore of Boston, in New England. Very similar, coastal town, a lot of kids who are sailing or rowing, just a lot of families who've lived in the area for generations, and I feel a sense of home here. So quite honestly, this just feels right. So thank you both. It's so great to be here, and also especially after Storm Kiara. July 3rd seems a long, long way away, but this Festival of Learning is going to happen, and it's closer than we think, and it will be fun to celebrate the magic of learning with everybody at that time. So let's take a moment before I start really what I want to talk about today, and just see if you can close your eyes if you wish. See if you can remember a teacher who made a difference in your life, just any teacher. I know that there's a heavy swing towards STEM in this audience today, and that's great. It can be a tech teacher, a computer teacher, engineering teacher, math teacher, science, but it can also be an English teacher, a history teacher, a religion teacher, a teacher, a primary teacher, somebody who meant a lot to you, somebody who you really look at as, this teacher was something for me, something meaningful for me. And I never say to groups, look for your favorite teacher, because it's not about a favorite teacher. In fact, I'm hoping that most of us can think of many favorite teachers or many meaningful teachers in our lives. And also that we believe that teaching is not a hierarchy. It's not a score sheet. It is not like, oh, this teacher is better than this teacher, better than this teacher. They're all doing their best, the ones that are the meaningful ones to you. But they also may be very different in personality, but not in character. So again, just keep in mind, in the back of your mind, as I'm speaking tonight, this teacher that meant a lot to you. And I'll wager that this teacher fits into what we're going to talk about today, and I encourage you to keep that teacher in mind. For me, as I was preparing for today, I couldn't help but think about my Year 7 teacher, Mr. Bradley. Mr. Bradley had this incredible library of books on his desk that this was a boys' school, this incredible number of books on his desk that we would want to read. And he taught reading from his own library, knowing what would appeal to 12-year-old boys' imaginations. The Call of the Wild, Journey to the Center of the Earth, and my favorite, which was Banner in the Sky. Mr. Bradley knew that in order to get his students to read at the boys' school where we attended, he needed to find literature that appealed to our interests, and he was masterful at this. Yet one time in Year 7, well, actually throughout Year 7, until this moment, I couldn't keep my shoes on. I would be at my desk, and I would not be focusing like I should, and I'd be spacing out, imagining myself on stage with the band The Police, or skiing in Chamonix with Jean-Claude Keely. One day, deep into my daytime classroom reverie, I found that one of my shoes had detached itself from my foot. Mr. Bradley noticed this too. And it just so happened that, on this particularly snowy and blustery day, Mr. Bradley had had enough. He put down his tattered copy of The Old Man and the Sea, he walked by my desk, he crouched down, he picked up my shoe, he walked to the window, he opened it wide, causing the snow to drift inside the classroom. He raised his arm back, and he tossed it outside, down the hill, into a drift. I still remember the feel of the icy snow running up my leg with every hop I took down the hill, scouring the ground for where my shoe disappeared. Needless to say, I didn't take my shoe off again in that class, or any class subsequently. And I resisted the urge to lose myself in another daydream of playing lead guitar with Sting. But how did Mr. Bradley not only get away with that, but also succeed in making me a better student? The answer didn't arrive until I became a teacher myself and realized that the only way Mr. Bradley could teach me the way he did was because he built a trusting relationship with me based on connection and belief. Simply put, Mr. Bradley knew me. Mr. Bradley knew my squirreliness, my posturing, my bravado, my 13-year-old untapped potential in academics, and a lot more. He knew that I was left-handed. Don't cramp your arm when you handwrite like that, Nat. He knew that I loved to sail. Looks like a gentle southwesterly breeze this morning, Nat. He knew I had identical younger twin brothers. I wonder which one resembles you more, Nat. And he knew that I had an older sister with intellectual special needs. Did I see Lynn at your football game yesterday, Nat? Mr. Bradley was not just my homeroom teacher with a rocket arm. He was also my football coach. He watched me at lunch. He watched me at recess. He even drove my school bus. Mr. Bradley literally saw me through Year 7. he really and truly saw me. In fact, when I think about it, he was seemingly everywhere, to the point where I actually felt a little bit paranoid at times. 1984 was the year that there was, at least in America, there was this song by this group Rockwell, or this gentleman Rockwell, called I Always Feel Like Somebody's Watching Me. Yeah, isn't that ironic? Yet by seeing me in all these different contexts, Mr. Bradley was able to know me. And because he knew me, he was able to teach me incredibly effectively. I'm thrilled to have the opportunity to speak with you tonight on what expert teachers really do. Thanks especially to Nikos and the West Sussex College community, the West Suffolk College community. Sorry, Meghan Markle's still in my head. Pearson Education, the ASCL, Nat Damon. And of course, Rob, to you for organizing this fantastic event. Apparently you're another man with a strong throwing arm. The International Festival of Learning's byline states, share the magic of education. My talk will focus on the opportunities that result when we view teaching through one of education's most magical elements, the qualitative human ingredient known as relationships. Why is this important? Because we live in a world in which data is king. In many realms, this is a value added. We want our pharmacists to calibrate the precise dose. We want our bank account to operate with precision. We want our cars to indicate when the petrol is running low in the tank. Teaching, however, has always been and always will be a human profession, impossible to fully define through metrics and quantitative measurement. With help from neuroscientists, researchers, and educators, we are now experiencing in the way that teaching is viewed. It's an exciting time, as a new science-based evidence argues for putting classroom relationships at the center of teaching and instruction. Psychologist Abraham Maslow knew the importance that comes with being secure. His hierarchy of needs illustrates that our basic needs are physiological: food, water, shelter. Only when these needs are met can we focus on learning. Expert teachers take Maslow's hierarchy into account. They build shelter in their classrooms through connecting with their students in an authentic way. They do this by seeing, hearing, and eventually trusting them. By doing this, they are creating a classroom environment where every student feels sheltered and grounded by being known. Science confirms the link between emotions and learning in promising ways, easily. One of the most fascinating neuroscientists I've ever had the opportunity to meet is Dr. Mary Helen Imordino Yang from the University of Southern California School of Education. One of the things that she does really well is break down science speak into understandable terms. So she explained to me that it is literally neurobiologically impossible to build memories, engage complex thoughts, or make meaningful decisions without emotion. This flies in the face of what we used to assume, that cognition and emotion are completely separate. Professor Imordino Yang's work confirms what seems more like instinct among the great teachers out there. Emotion matters in learning. It is a central component to learning, not something separate from learning. It's about motivation through aspiration, incentives through hope, guidance through advocacy. As primary school teacher from Texas, you may have seen her on a TED Talk, Rita Pearson exclaims, "Kids don't learn from teachers they don't like." If you haven't had a chance to listen to this TED Talk, oh my gosh, I recommend it highly on your way back home or when you get home, and you will wish that Rita Pearson was your primary school teacher or that your kids, your grandchildren were able to have her. She's amazing. And she gets it. Kids don't learn from teachers they don't like. Johns Hopkins Vice Chancellor and Professor of Education, Marielle Hardiman, who states in her book, Connecting Brain Research with Learning, states, brain research supports the notion that a positive emotional climate paves the way for higher levels of learning and performance. On the other hand, a threatening and stressful learning environment can significantly impede learning. And I bet the teacher you continue to have in mind, in the back of your minds, created a positive emotional climate in his or her classroom. When it comes to how students learn, nothing's changed over the past 25 years since I was teaching with a whiteboard, triplicate report card forms only to be filled with a ballpoint pen, and one telephone in the middle of the English department office. We learn the same way we always have, using the same hardware, the brain, the heart, even the physical body. The term muscle memory comes to mind. Yet how we teach has been transformed exponentially, profoundly, and permanently. Just over 4 years ago, I had the opportunity to leave 23 years of being in the rushing rapids of school to move to London. Instead of jumping into what would have been a very familiar and secure habitat for me, another school, I instead decided to take this time to reflect. and to actually treat my first year as a sabbatical. And what I started doing was writing a meditation, just a meditation on teaching, how things have changed, how things are the same since 1993, in almost a quarter of a century. And I started sharing this meditation, these thoughts, with other teacher friends of mine in the US, who then started sharing their thoughts. And then they started saying, hey, Nat, you should go talk to this teacher over in Colorado. Go talk to this teacher in San Francisco. You should talk to this teacher in Atlanta. Before I knew it, I spent the next 18 months interviewing over 150 teachers, all expert teachers. And by the expert, I mean 10 or more years in the classroom, from public schools, private schools, religious schools, charter schools in the US, the UK, and in Finland. Actually, it brought me to Finland. And what came out of this set of interviews was a book, yes, Time to Teach, Time to Reach, but also 6 central themes. 6 central themes that these expert teachers cite as their most important elements of what they do in the classroom. And they're all qualitative, and they're challenging to measure quantitatively, but I think that you'll agree they're all vitally important, particularly when it comes to building that relationship with your students in the classroom. And it's kind of neat and fortunate for me because I was able to turn these six themes into an acronym: TEACHER. Trust, exploration, authenticity, connection, hope, reflection. Teacher. I didn't want the extra E. So I want to spend the next couple minutes kind of taking a sample of each of these elements from these teachers' own voices, so you can get a sense through story about how each of these elements factor into the relational work they do in the classroom. So I'll start with trust. Eric Wilasik is the Director of Diversity and Inclusion at Village School in Pacific Palisades, California. He's also a fourth grade teacher. And he talks about building trust through knowing one's kids, particularly building trust with parents. He says, in talking with people who are not teachers, I ask them to imagine you're dealing with the most important person in someone's life, times 25, or 30, or even 40. Imagine this. You're managing 25 to 40 people who all have different needs. Then you hear from their parents questions about their kids. Why did you challenge Johnny that way? Why did Julie come home feeling so quiet? Your response is critical, and it will be used against you if it doesn't reflect the one thing that parents are seeking. Do you know who my kid is? Do you really know who they are? It's all about knowing their kids. That's just one of hundreds and hundreds of examples of building trust in the classroom, right? If you can communicate to parents that you know their kids, then you've got them as allies, as partners in the teaching triangle. How you can establish that trust can only come with knowing each individual student on a personal, relational level. E, explore. Nancy Carlson Page, Matt Damon's mother, actually. Nancy Carlson Page is a professor at Lesley University in Boston, and her area of focus is the early childhood department there. And she's been a legend in early childhood development studies. She runs a program called Defending the Early Years. She's just amazing. And she talks about exploration when she talks about permitting play, imaginary play. Good teachers, she said to me, are watching. They see what their students are working on and they build on it. For example, upon completing a building project using random household objects, a group of proud students say to their teacher, hey, look how tall my building is. The expert teacher aims to expand their learning by asking questions like, well, how tall is it? How do we know it's that tall? How would you tell? You use 5 paper towel rolls to build this building. What if we use these wooden cubes over there instead? How many of these would it take, these cubes, to make a building as high as the one you made using paper towel rolls? Then you're right into your math lesson. Every idea that you have and that I have, we invented in our own bright minds. It's not because someone told us this is how you do it and told us to memorize what they said. It's because we made the idea ours. I love that. We made the idea ours. She talks about actually Matt, when he was younger, he had put on like this red baseball cap backward, Red Sox obviously, hat backwards, and put on a blanket or like a cape, and he had this like rope or something in his hands. And his mom goes to him, she's like, Matt, what are you doing? What are you trying to be? And he says, I'm a fireman. And she's like, of course you are. Of course you are. He wasn't wearing a Halloween costume of a fireman. He wasn't being a perfect little fireman with a perfect fireman's hat, but he was a fireman. He owned being a fireman. He owned his imagination, his creativity, his exploration. A, be authentic. Todd Whitten, 30-year history teacher at Burlington High School, Massachusetts, talks about being okay with not knowing. And it's okay to be the authentic teacher who might not know everything. In fact, knowing everything can be distancing. Over and over, when I started teaching, he says, I wasn't an expert in the subject. I couldn't have been. You can't be a world history teacher and know everything. I'm still not. But over time, I realized that I was good at connecting with people. I would come into the classroom with these somewhat rudimentary people skills, and I would build upon them as I simultaneously built upon my content knowledge. Over time, I grew, and at some point, I came to recognize that teenagers want to be taken seriously, and that they want to be valued, and that my people skills were vital. I recognized that I was in this incredibly powerful position of seeing my students, and that connecting was actually even more important than the content when it came to learning. Now, he learned that 25 years ago, all right? Mary Helen Immordino Yang, Louis Cozzolino, they're all learning, they're all using science today to back up what we know instinctively. And this is awesome, and this is encouraging. C, connect. Sarah Bailey, teacher at Plymouth Charter School, Plymouth, Massachusetts, talks about how 10 seconds can actually change a kid's life. I had a student who moved into a new grade mid-year. During the entire spring, I kept trying to make inroads with him in class. I would ask questions, solicit his direct feedback, but to no avail. The poor guy was 13 years old and at a new school, and here was his teacher hounding him to connect, which never works. But at the end of the year, I saw him in the hallway, and I congratulated him for a successful basketball season. In response, he flat out said, I know I cared way more about basketball than school this year. Next year is going to be different. The fact that he could say that and in 10 seconds share what needed to shift and how he planned to shift it is pretty amazing. And what I find amazing, if Sarah hadn't just gone up to him in a 10-second sidebar conversation, and if she hadn't been at the basketball game, she hadn't recognized, hey, you did well in that basketball game, he would never have just opened up like that. They would never have had that conversation where he reflected and he said, you know what, and almost confessed, you know what, I prioritize basketball over your class. I'll do better next year. Just those moments. H, allow for hope. Suzanne Walker Buck, she's a head teacher at Chatham Hall School in Virginia for girls, boarding school, high school, secondary school. She says, these girls, this group of 3 girls, they had just watched a YouTube video about animal extinction. Some were crying, and they were all talking about concerns over endangered species. This teacher knew that she had to get them into content mode, but instead of pushing through curriculum first, she chose to utilize the example of extinction to talk about it in a hopeful way. Actually, by talking about activism and using activism as a lens where they can make a genuine difference. The teacher was able to get those students back on task in terms of looking at activism and the positive results that can spring forward from activism well executed. Now, activism can be an inflammatory word, but what she's communicating here is this idea of, yes, this is awful, what's going on halfway around the world, and you're seeing it through technology, and your feelings are totally okay. But what if we were to actually do something about it? How can we be active in taking those feelings and applying them to something proactive? How can we infuse hope into what is so fear-based? And the last anecdote I'll share, which is honestly my favorite. We're not supposed to have favorite students, all right? But I do have a favorite anecdote. And this is by Dr. Robin Berman, who's a pediatrician. She's a family psychiatrist, actually. And she talks about when she was just before she was in medical school. She's amazing. And this is so small, so short, but so powerful. She says, I was teaching kindergarten, 5-year-olds, and this little boy stood on a book. He had dropped the book and was just standing on it. My first reaction was to correct. We don't stand on books here. But instead, I decided to connect. I asked him, Sam, why are you standing on that book? I asked this question in a gentle tone, not a harsh or punitive one. And his answer, I want to go in. If she had corrected before she connected, she would never have gotten that answer. She would have done the right job and taught Sam how to not stand on books. But that insight into a 5-year-old's mind, you just can't put a price tag on that. And her connection with Sam throughout the rest of the year clearly was positively impacted. So if I ask you to reflect back on your school experience, chances are you won't remember, which teacher taught you the tens places or hundreds places and decimals, or which teacher taught you the Magna Carta, mitochondria, or the Oxford comma. But I bet you could, when thinking about a teacher that you're keeping in mind tonight maybe, recognize how he or she challenged you completely, how this teacher helped you to grow and evolve and become, how this teacher expressed belief in you. So relational teaching, it is the teacher model: trust, exploration, authenticity, connection, hope, and absolutely reflection time. Time to reflect, time to teach, time to reach. Knowing all this, shouldn't all schools prioritize a culture of stability and security, knowing that every student, and to be honest, teacher, will fail multiple times so that they can stand up again on a firm foundation? Isn't the goal to maintain a school fitted for students? Yes, but also for students, as opposed to fitting in students always trying to fit into, to conform into the school. A school that's tribal in design. A school that views assessments as genuine learning tools instead of always high-stakes metrics. A society that values the hard work and the heart work that expert teachers bring to the classroom by providing support to the social and emotional needs of students so that they're not going alone in the silos of their classroom. A school that shows respect for the teachers in their ranks by allocating time to teach and reach in all ways, through the head and through the heart. When I was in Finland, I've been to Helsinki a few times, and it's just great because every hour in their daily schedule, they have 15 minutes of unstructured time. This unstructured time, the kids can go out and run or do whatever they want, recess, collaborate, and it gives teachers a time to connect with each other, to collaborate, and they use it. Time, probably the most vanishing commodity as a teacher. At the beginning of this talk, I mentioned that Mr. Bradley had built a trusting relationship with me based on connection and belief. I spoke about the importance of his connection to me, and I'll leave you with an example of his belief in me. That same winter, Mr. Bradley gave me the most memorable report card comment I'd ever received. I started year 7 feeling kind of cocky, arrogant. I'd gone to a strong local public elementary school. I loved to read, and I questioned everything. Yet in the middle of that year, I slacked off. I got lazy, and I became aloof. So my report card arrived. C, 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 B+, B+. Now in the US, this is not a very good report card. In fact, 1984, grade inflation was kind of a thing, at least in my school. It was really not a good report card. Yet beyond the authentic grades was his 6-word comment to me that he wrote on the bottom of the report card. Don't rest on your laurels, Nat. Don't rest on your laurels, Nat. I didn't know what a laurel was. So I went home, but because it was Mr. Bradley, I went home and I looked it up in the dictionary, and I found out what a laurel was, and I got the message. Clean, clear, blunt, yet encouraging. Centered on belief. Mr. Bradley could only have written that comment through knowing me and believing in me. He could only have been so transparent by having watched me exhibit my best effort and noticed it when it was no longer visible. He could only have communicated this negative feedback through having built a connective bridge with me. I trusted him. I hopped down a hill in a snowstorm for him. So I received the message, and I did put his words to action. When I began this evening, I asked you to think about a teacher who was truly meaningful to you, and I hope you were able to attribute that teacher to much of what's been discussed tonight, that you were able to more deeply understand how that teacher connected with you in a meaningful and profound way. This is relational teaching. At the heart of it, this is what expert teachers do. The winds are guiding us toward recognizing the relational in education. These are revolutionary winds of change. Let's ensure that these winds are guiding us from the gentle southwest to a haven where today's students can learn with both heart and mind and grow from authentic relationships based on trust, exploration, authenticity, connection, hope, and reflection. Let's renew our commitment to spotlighting relationships in teaching. Our students' future, and our future as well, will best be served if we can prioritize relationships in the classroom. Thank you.